Hey, Ignite Church, Pastor Jason here. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Matthew. For those of you who you listened to me yesterday and you listened to chapters 1 through 12 in one sitting and have caught up with us, thank you for joining me for the first time. For those of you who've been on the journey now for almost 2 weeks, thank you for joining with me and our whole staff and going through the book of Matthew. It's such a powerful, amazing, good book, isn't it? It's full of such incredible stories. It's full of such incredible truth. If you don't like the book of Matthew, I'm sorry. I don't get it, because it's such a great book, and it's filled with such incredible instruction for our life. So I have the blessing today of taking you a little deeper into a part of Matthew 13. Now, if you weren't with us yesterday in church, we went through Matthew 12 together. It's an important chapter. It really designates, as far as the book of Matthew goes, this sharp distinction between pre-persecution by the Pharisees with Jesus, and everything that comes after is post-persecution by the Pharisees. And again, Matthew is structuring his book with intentionality. It's not necessarily perfectly chronological. Instead, it's based by topic. And he had a particular journey that he was taking the people of Israel on to illustrate the kingship and lordship of Jesus. And so today, as we go into chapter 13, if you haven't already read it, Jesus gets into some very hard-hitting, very powerful parables. And I love a good parable. And so, chapters like this is I just love it. Great stories that paint pictures that help us to see more than a paragraph should be able to show. So in a few sentences, Jesus says things that, I mean this very literally. Hundreds of brilliant scholars have written and considered for thousands of hours, on the few sentences he says. So he tells a story that takes 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm telling you, people have spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, delving into the depth of what he meant by these stories. So it's a pretty big deal. And in chapter 13, we have some very famous parables, the most famous being the parable of the sower. If you've never heard of the parable of the sower, that's not what we're going to talk about today, but it's really worth your time to go study it, where a sower goes out and casts seeds on different types of soil, and you see the reaction that the same seed has depending on the soil that it was thrown into. And of course, Jesus explains that parable very, very well, even in this chapter. And so go read it, go study it, and be encouraged and challenged by it. What I wanted to do is take time in chapter 13, starting with verse 34 and going through verse 40, and it's the parable of the tares. And so, if for any reason I have the verses wrong, because I don't have my Bible in front of me, I love the story, I know the story, and wanted to just talk to you about it. That's what I believe the verses are in chapter 13, but give me a little bit of grace. It'll be within a verse or two, I promise, of that. And I'll retell very generally the story, and then we'll talk about its meaning and its depth. There's a landowner in this story, and he plants acres and acres and acres of wheat. Wheat was an extremely important crop for the people of Israel. Again, it's hard for us in the modern American context to understand the true value of wheat. Wheat's where we get a lot of bread from, and bread for most of us Americans, it is a side dish. It is the bun on our burger, but the meat's the star. It's the buttered roll with our steak or our chicken or our fish, but typically the protein is the star. In the land of Israel, where proteins were usually more given by beans, by other plants, than by meat, meat was there, but it was very expensive, and it was for very special occasions. Bread was such an important food. If you had water and you had bread, you could live. It was such a huge source of carbohydrates. Bread was a big deal. Wheat was a big deal. So this landowner is putting out crops of wheat again, and in the middle of the night, an enemy comes in and sows tares, which are weeds that look a lot like wheat. And they're actually this is a reality. So the people of Israel would be nodding like there was a law against sowing tares by the Romans, because it was such a common practice for enemies to do that. There really were weeds that looked so much like wheat that you couldn't tell the difference until it was harvest time. And harvest time, as the wheat ripens, eventually it bears fruit. And of course, weeds are not fruitful, and they're not going to bear fruit. And so at the very end, you could tell, but they looked very, very much like wheat right up until the very end. And in the story, the servants discover that the tares are there after some time has passed. They go to the landowner, what happened? And he's like, an enemy did this. This can't be natural. There's way too much going on here for this. And so the servants say, well, do you want us to take out the weeds? You want us to pull out the weeds so that the wheat can flourish. The problem with the weeds being in your field is that they take resources. Sunlight that should go to the wheat is going to the weeds. Water that should go to the wheat is going to the weeds. Nutrients, whether from the soil or from fertilizer, that should be going to the wheat is going to the weeds. So like the servants are saying, hey, should we take them out so that the wheat can get everything that it's supposed to have? And the landowner, who is very wise and experienced in agriculture, says, no, you can't do that. First of all, we don't know fully what is wheat and what are tares, because until everything is fully matured, they look exactly the same. So I don't want to pull out wheat that you think is a tare and it's actually wheat. Secondly, the way that most weeds work is their root system connects to other plants around them and tangles up with them. And so when you pull out weeds, unless you're very, very careful, you're going to pull out other things that are around weeds. And I have a lot of personal experience from this. My wife and I have a lot of fruit-bearing things in our backyard. I have an apple tree, a peach tree, I have a fig tree, I have blackberries, raspberries, and several things of strawberries. And so we grow things at the Lineberger house that we can eat, because we like to do that, and like things that are sweet to eat in particular. And strawberries in particular, weeds love springing up for whatever reason around my strawberries. And it's really hard to get the weeds up, because they wrap around by the root system things. And I pulled up some strawberries trying to pull up weeds before. So the owner says, no, don't do that. Wait till everything's harvested, and then you'll separate it. Because when it's time for the harvest, it's evident what's wheat and it's evident what's a weed. How? The wheat is fruitful. It's full of grain. Like it's full of grain. Like you can see it. It's manifest when maturity comes. And so like in a very, very general sense, to his audience and to us, Jesus is describing the kingdom of heaven. He's saying, listen, like sometimes it's hard looking on earth and seeing like who is a believer and who's not. In some moments we all really look very similar. But as a believer matures, they should begin to bear fruit. And eventually, a believer does not look like an unbeliever anymore, because one has a fruitful life, the other does not. Now, if you're wondering what a fruitful life looks like, I believe it's twofold. One, Galatians 5, fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control, and gentleness. Like that is what those are fruits of the Spirit. That is what a believer should look like. And there is an expectation that as we grow in our walk with Christ, we should be filled with those spiritual fruits, and that they should be evident to the world. I also think that fruitfulness refers to like multiplication. Disciples make disciples, and we've been called and commissioned to make disciples. And so when something has changed your life and impacted your life, you can't help but share that with others. And so I think fruitfulness means two different things. It's like at the end, true wheat will be fruitful, and weeds will not be. Now, what does this have to do with us, particularly those of us in the church? Because you're watching this because you're a part of the church. I don't say this to be harsh. I don't say this to be judging, but I do say this like the only way we can ever grow is we have to see where we are and see where we want to go. Like that, with any goal, if you don't know where you are, you'll never be able to reach the goal of where you want to go. The church is filled with people who look like wheat, but they're not. There's not fruitfulness in their life. But on a Sunday morning, you can't tell. Like they stand up when we all stand up, and they can sing songs, and they can nod their head to my points, and they can laugh at my jokes. And this isn't me being a judgy at all. It's like, but like fruitfulness is what the Father is looking for. Again, as a modern individual, we quantify and classify things more scientifically perhaps than your average Israelite would have. That doesn't mean that we're more right than them. So just to give you kind of like an example of what I'm talking about here, I would say as a modern person that a grapevine, if it has the DNA of a grapevine, is a grapevine, whether it has grapes on it or not, whether it ever produces grapes or not. A grapevine is a grapevine. To an Israelite and to Jesus, grapevines produce grapes. And if it didn't produce grapes, it's not a grapevine. You know what I mean? Like, that was one reason why there's another story that is controversial where Jesus curses a fig tree. And it's like, if a fig tree doesn't make figs, it's not a fig tree. It's useless. It means nothing. And so, like the kingdom value is fruitfulness. And so, for ourselves, man, we should be praying for fruitfulness. We should be longing for fruitfulness. And we should be prioritizing fruitfulness in our life. And then for those around us, who say they're believers, like one of the most loving things that we can do to someone who says they're a believer, but there's a lack of fruitfulness in their life, is to love them enough to let them know that, hey, if the owner shows up and if the harvest is near and there's not a lot of fruit there. And we need to live a fruitful life. The Holy Spirit who lives in us should be moving us to be less of us and more of Jesus. And so take today and take some time to ask Christ, like, what parts of my life are fruitful? And what areas of my life do I need to be intentional in increasing my fruitfulness? So that when the day comes, because here's like the Father's desire, the landowner's desire, when the day comes, what the landowner ultimately desires is that he would have a huge harvest that is fruitful, and that there'd be very, very few weeds to go and burn in the end. Man, I want every single person who's part of our church to not only be a Christian, but to be a fruitful Christian, so that when their day comes, standing in front of the Father, there's no question who they are because their lives were so full of fruit. Thanks for letting me have time to go through this chapter with you. Of course, tomorrow, another one of our staff members will take you through chapter 14. It's amazing and good. We'll see you, and we love you, and I can't wait to keep going through Matthew with you all.